at least part of the story of Elijah and the widow in Zarephath. After a while, the brook dried up because of the lack of rain. And then the Lord said to Elijah, "Now go to the town of Zarephath near Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow who lives there to feed you." So Elijah went to Zarephath, and as he came to the town gate, he saw a widow gathering firewood. "Please bring me a drink of water," he said to her. And as she was going to get it, he called out, "And please bring me some bread, too." She answered, "By the living Lord your God, I swear that I don't have any bread. All I have is a handful of flour in a bowl and a bit of olive oil in a jar. I came here to gather some firewood to take back home and prepare what little I have for my son and me. That will be our last meal, and then we will starve to death." "Don't worry," Elijah said to her. "Go on and prepare your meal. But first make a small loaf from what you have and bring it to me, and then prepare the rest for your son and you. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: the bowl will not run out of flour, or the jar run out of oil, before the day that I, the Lord, send rain." The widow went and did as Elijah had told her, and all of them had enough food for many days. As the Lord had promised through Elijah, the bowl did not run out of flour, nor did the jar run out of oil. Here endeth the reading.
Remembering God's provision. Like I mentioned in the children's message, the Israelites never seemed very good with remembering God's provision as they were going through trying times. Remember the stories in Exodus. After God provided escape from slavery and the brutality of the Egyptians, they complained about their food. God provided them with manna, that substance on the ground every day to gather. They complained about lack of water. God provided water through a rock. They complained about having no meat. They provided quail. More than they could eat. They complained all the way to the promised land. However, to this day, the Jewish people remember God's provision in their history because it's written down, and the story of God's provision is repeated time and time again, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, around the Passover table. The Jewish heritage is rich in remembering God's provision. But how well do we do in remembering this, as individuals and as a community of faith? Do we remember to trust God, that God will continue to provide for us? Or do we just start complaining about the next thing? How well do we share our stories of the witness of provision to other people? And how does God provide anyway? Is it in this miraculous, unexplainable way, or is it in everyday circumstances? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Yes and. Both and. Sometimes things happen that are unexplainably miraculous. And other times things work out by decisions of daily living, but things turn out perhaps very different than we expected. For a moment, let us look at the widow's flour bin that was never used up, or the oil that never went dry. So this story starts out by God instructing Elijah to go to this widow Out of all the people God could have sent him to, he sent him to her. Specifically. So, right, God provides us by sending people in our lives. This woman's about to prepare what she believed would be the last meal for her and her son. Her cupboard was bare. Can you go back one? Maybe I didn't put a... that's good. Thank you. First, Elijah asked for water, which she was going to give him, and then a piece of bread. And she's like, well, I have no bread. I'm just about to make the last bit of bread for my son and I. And Elijah says, don't fear. Go and do what you said, but make me some first. And then you and your son have some. Now, if Elijah had stopped right there, do you think she would have done that? I don't know. I don't know if I would have, right? But he didn't stop there. Elijah didn't stop there. He said, for thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain to the earth. We are told then that she did what was asked. She overcame her fear of starvation for her and her son, and she responded with faith that God would provide just as Elijah said. And sure enough, the bin of flour was not used up and the jar of oil did not run dry. This story, holds true for us today. When we are faithful to what God asks of us, it doesn't mean saying yes to every time a person asks you something. That's different, right? But when you know something's coming from God, God provides when we follow through. I've seen this in other people's life. I've seen this in my own life. I want to share a story with you that maybe I've shared before. I honestly couldn't remember, but in any event, it was worth repeating, even if I did share it before. When I served a church in Wooddale, Pennsylvania, they had a pavilion outside with a commercial kitchen attached. And they held 4 dinners a year, June through September. September was pork and sauerkraut. Normally we served 2 seatings of 65 people. People would come get tickets for the first seating. Once it was at 65, people waited for the second seating. People could eat as much as they liked. It was family style. On that particular September evening, we had people sitting for a 3rd seating. Not a full 3rd seating, but quite a few people for a 3rd seating. The head cook, John, opened up the pork and sauerkraut large container and he said, we're running low. If we can feed the people that are for the 3rd seating, there will be none for the workers. Now, there was about 15 people who always worked these dinners. We all agreed, let the people have this, and we'll go home and we'll eat when we get home. So John, when the time came that the 3rd seating was seated, John opened the lid to the pork and sauerkraut to start dishing up this large pot that he had, and it was half full. He was like, it's half full. Now, no one could have tried to play a trick on him or anything. John was the head cook. He knew where everything was at all times. He knew how much food there was at all times. It was half full. Not only did we feed the people who were at the 3rd sitting, every person that was working it ate, and there was some left over. God's provision. I have to think that if the people working had said to John, well, let's just tell the people we're running out, that the outcome would have been a little different. But they were faithful. They were putting others first. Now this is an example, like in our biblical story, of a miraculous, kind of unexplainable way that circumstances of our life. The Lord can lead us to certain work. Nursing, teaching, the arts, carpentry, administrating, technology, management, retail, food service, being a radio announcer and on TV. Yeah, you. It can be anything. But you can be assured that if the Lord led you to it, it is blessed and will be used as a provision for others. For example, in hospitals, there's a hospital housekeeping staff. And I am without doubt that some take that job, they're in that profession because they believe maybe it's the only thing I can do. Or I do it because it's close to home. Or I do it because it's convenient. Or I'm doing it while I go to school. And that's like with any kind of work. Sometimes we do these intermittent things and intermediate things. But I believe without a shadow of a doubt that some people are called to do that. To be on a housekeeping staff of a hospital. Because patients have shared with me that in the nighttime, the housekeeping staff, someone would come and pray with them, a stranger, but they got to know them through going into their room and doing what they needed to do. The Lord is providing connection and comfort through that person at that time. So where has God led you lately to bless your work and provide through wherever you are, whatever you're doing? When I say work, I am not talking about just the workforce, right? Not just a paying job, although it can be. But rather, what God leads you to, whether you're in the current workforce, whether you are working in the home, whether you are retired and volunteering somewhere, it might mean organizing meals for people, which some of you have done here. It might be picking someone up to come to church or a church activity. Remember, you have your homework from last week. Before the end of summer, what are you going to do? Invite someone, right? Invite someone. It might be writing notes to people. It might be visiting or calling or baking. Yes, you. Right? It might be, it's using your gifts and talents, whether it's within your own family, within the community of faith, within your own community, a neighbor, an organization. God will use you. If you're on this part of your eternal life, which we all are, there's a reason. There's a purpose. There's still a purpose. Retired or not. If we allow it, God provides through us to others, sometimes despite ourselves. And God uses you as that miracle. I'm hoping we all have examples of how God has provided for us in the past, as individuals and as a community of faith. Remembering God's provision of the past helps us in our faith and hope of provision in our present and in our future. Whether that provision comes miraculously or through everyday circumstances of life. Normally, as we're experiencing difficulties in our life, as the Israelites did, we might not see the provision right away. It's in hindsight. But then we can look back on our life and recognize where God's hand was all that time. Or you wouldn't be here now. It's when we look back and think about all the times there was trouble or sorrow, sickness, or other difficulties, and how things worked out differently than we expected. God saw us through. God provided a way. Remembering God's provision in our lives is so important. And sharing how God has provided for you is important. Sharing our stories helps us help others in their faith and in their hope of provision, in their present and in their future. So today, and over the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about different kinds of miracles these next few weeks. And each time there'll be someone speaking after I speak for a little bit, just sharing a story of faith. So today I've asked Judy to share her miracle story with you about God's provision in her and her husband's life.
I'm not going to talk about pork and sauerkraut. Although I grew up on it and had to have mashed potatoes.
I know you.
Ben and I were married in July of 1975, and I was 28 years old. About a year later, we decided to begin our family, and I became pregnant fairly quickly. However, in December of 76, I had a miscarriage. I was sad, but I was also encouraged that I would soon become pregnant again. The first time was fairly quick, it would happen again. But 10 years went by, with periods of infertility tests and treatment, with no success. During that time, several of my friends had babies. I avoided baby showers, and still no baby for us. On March 22nd, 1986, a close friend of mine who had also dealt with infertility gave birth to a baby boy. I remember visiting her in the hospital and holding her baby and thinking how easy it would be to have this baby be my own. The very next day, the 23rd of March, a friend of mine who's also an OBGYN called me. She told me that she knew of a set of twins that was going to be born, and they were due the end of April. And she had gone, she didn't know who to go to, and she knew me, we were friends, she knew that we had been trying to have a baby, and she also talked to a doctor friend of hers, and together they both came up with our names. That was a miracle right there. This was on a Saturday that she called me, and she asked that we let her know by Monday if we were interested or not. We didn't have to be definitely sure. It wasn't really quite enough time to decide for sure. But if we were not interested, then she would have to go and continue exploring other possible adoptive families. I spent the next few days talking with friends about adoption and raising twins. The whole idea seemed absolutely overwhelming. How was I even going to get out of the house with two babies? We made our decision to go ahead and adopt the twins several days later. Heather Marie and Benjamin Worth III were born almost 3 weeks earlier on Wednesday, April 9th. We were not ready. We didn't have anything. I remember we had them transferred. They were born in North Conway, and because we didn't want to have contact at the time with the birth mother, they were transferred up to Berlin at Androscoggin Valley Hospital. And I remember coming home from visiting up there with a friend of mine. Ben and I went up the night they were born. But a friend of mine went up and saw them, spent some time with them before they were discharged. And there used to be a department store there called Rich's in Gorham. I don't know if any of you remember it, but we stopped at Rich's and just about bought the store out. And people gave us stuff. We were given a crib. We were given 2 cribs, as a matter of fact. We were given a cradle. We were given, I don't remember what all. It was just phenomenal how people came out and gave us things. At the time, I didn't think about our adopting twins as being a gift from God. I just felt incredibly lucky, or we felt incredibly lucky. I think I was more, how do I put it? I was more enthusiastic about adopting twins than my husband was. But, he went along with it, and I think in the end he's very glad he has 2 wonderful children. I had gotten into the busy life of a mother of newborn twins, and I didn't think very much about it. I was just focused on what I was doing and didn't think about it. I never prayed about wanting to be a mother. In fact, the thought hadn't even occurred to me. But when I became a Christian about 3 years later, I began to think about how God was leading in my life. And as I look back on it, I realized that His fulfilling my wish to be a mother was indeed a real miracle. Even though I hadn't even asked for it, He provided for us in a way that as I look back on it, I was able to see how He had placed those children in our lives and what a blessing they have been. It hasn't been all easy. It still isn't all easy, and they're 36 years old. But we're just so glad that he provided this for us. Thank you.
Thank you. God's provision. We're hearing more stories about different types of miraculous events in the next few weeks, like I said. But for now, let us thank God for each of us. Thank God for what we have in our lives, all the blessings of the past and of the present, and those things yet to come. Those who are able, please rise. Now, thank we all our God. May we leave here thankful for how God continues to provide for us. And may we leave here hopeful, knowing that there are future provisions in store. Happy Mother's Day to all women. Amen.